By home after rebirth by dead enemy author, Feather Snake copy. As soon as you enter the deep palace, you can't help yourself. Chu Shenzhou's family was destroyed with just one sentence. The reason is that he is the sword in the hands of the emperor, and the prince is the thorn in the eyes of the emperor. The words are always what Chu Shenzhou said. After the prince defected, he swore that one day he would be crushed to ashes. For this reason, he has been waiting for the prince in Beijing for many years. Until he dies. He confessed his sins, and did not ask his son to understand his secret help all these years. I just want to pay off this debt. So in front of Lu Shizi, he died in the most tragic manner. But he didn't see the prince holding his body in pain, almost insane. Chu Shenzhou, how dare you lie to me? The 7th year of Yuan, winter. Ningchen Chu Shenzhou died, and all parties applauded. Only one person, as if everything was lost. Number so shouldn't the story end here? Why do you still bring your dreams back 10 years ago? Number it's not a dream, but it's alive again. Number my Chu Shenzhou is also a real death. Number what happened to being sold to the prince? Is it too late to die in place now? This is a story about a crooked full-level boss who was beaten back to the novice village and slowly upgraded and retrained 1v1. He ending, lovers of beauty, strong and miserable, so the rhythm is BDSM for official positions, please refer to Tang. The most important positions are compiled by me. Content tags, rebirth of the strong court marquee search keywords, protagonist, Chu Shenzhou, Lu Chongming supporting role, miscellaneous others, one sentence introduction, the dead enemy has regained his memory, intention, even if the strength is meager, persevere and work hard, you can change the world. In the 7th year of Yuan, the fire that had already burned the city gate finally approached the Forbidden City. In the past, the Miyagi city, which people did not dare to look up when they passed by, was scorched black by the fire, and the glory and dignity of the past could no longer be seen. Since last night, the screams of murder rushing in from the palace gates in all directions have been continuous, and the place where there used to be only whispers and laughter Yan has turned into a sea of blood in a blink of an eye. No one can escape, and those who want to escape have become ghosts under the knife. The emperor did not show up for a few days, and the nobles hid in the hall and dared not move, waiting anxiously for the killing that might come at any time. But as everyone can imagine, they won't bear the brunt. In this deep palace, the most concerned about the rebels is the famous Guan pavilion. In those days, someone opened his thin lips and spit out a hexagram, so that the Lu family was almost slaughtered. Fortunately, the people who are determined by heaven are blessed with a great fate, and they are lucky to escape. In the next few years, the war began to ignite, and now it has burned into the Miyagi. Therefore, the person who is about to ascend the throne of the 95 Lord most hates the heavenly official who decides life and death, and even the emperor who ordered Liu's family to be executed can't look back. More calm than anyone else. Cool and beautiful. Since the fire broke out in the palace last night, he sat alone at the desk, staring at the unstained white paper in front of him, and after a long time he gently pulled back the disturbing long hair that fell on his shoulders, flirting, writing down. Reclarification, seeing the letter as face. 1. He hummed a tune lightly, and quickly filled a sheet, and then was thrown into the censer and turned to ashes. The wrist was sore from writing, so he got up, went to the cabinet and took out a package, took out the exquisite box of 8 treasures. The key of the box is not with him. Once it is locked, it cannot be opened again. But he knew that the person must still keep the key, waiting to open this exquisite box one day, expecting him to leave a few words. What a pity he took a few handfuls of ashes from the censer and put them in with great care. The silver lock on the lid locks with a crisp sound. It was his last prank. I don't know if that person will be furious when he opens the box and sees the ashes burning beyond recognition. Someone shouted, "Guard everywhere, don't teach people to escape. Wait for the command of the marshal." He twitched the corners of his mouth and wanted to laugh. He hasn't escaped for so many years, where can he escape now? The sound of footsteps came from the steps until it was dawn. As early as going upstairs, Bai Shilai, who was behind Jing Chen, almost clenched his fists to bleed, his eyes wishing to pierce people. Jing Chen reached out his hand to stop Bai Shilai's urge, stared at the other's world-famous eyes, and politely returned, "Chu Sishan, I haven't seen you for many years, and his style is better than that of the past, no wonder people all over the world say it. Lang Yan is unique in the world. Excessive reputation." Chu Chenzhou nodded, speechless. Jing Chen raised his hand, and someone brought a glass of wine. "Does Chu Sishan have any other wishes?" Chu Chenzhou's calm gaze fell on the wine glass and raised it again. He was used to being reticent in the palace, and when it came to the end, he didn't know what to say. "Yes," he thought for a moment, and replied, "It is not a pity for Chu Chenzhou to die, but also ask the marshal to keep the emperor's life." "Bah!" Bai Shilai spat fiercely, "What a loyal dog, what qualifications do you have to plead for others? Do you have friendship in the past? Do you know that the second brother has been in these years? How did you get here?" "I'm sorry for him." Chu Chenzhou lowered his eyes and was silent for a moment, then pursed his thin lips lightly, insisting, "I would like to die and replace the emperor's life." "Does Chu Sishan think it's poisonous wine?" Jing Chen's calmness was also filled with sarcasm. If Chu Sishan wanted to die so soon, it would be too naive. The wine glass was handed over in Jing Chen's hand. "Chu Sishan's tongue is like a knife. You should know how many people have been ruined because of your words over the years. The marshal just wanted to seal your mouth first, how to deal with it later, say it again." Chu Chenzhou sighed in his heart, and wanted to laugh at himself, but found that he was used to being so calm. What should come will always come. Chongming doesn't even want to hear his excuse. But, he had blood on his hands, what was there to justify? After a while, he took the wine slowly, looked at the reflection in the glass, and asked softly, "Can I see him?" Bai Shilai sneered from behind, "Chu Chenzhou, what face do you have to see him?" Chu Chenzhou pursed his lips, not at all unhappy because of his sarcasm. Then he, "Has something to say to me?" "Yes," this time there was an answer quickly, with a mocking smile on the corner of Bai Shilai's mouth. Second brother said, "Don't kill him." It felt like someone had been punched hard in the chest, and Chu Chenzhou couldn't breathe for a while. He raised his glass and saw the flushed eyes in the reflection. "Okay." Seeing that he was about to drink, Jing Chen suddenly asked, "It is said that Chu Sishan, as a man of words, cannot lie, can you answer me first?" Chu Shenzhou's eyes did not leave the rippling water in the cup. "Please speak. Does Chu Sishan know that every word of yours will be related to the life and death of many people?" "No." "Then why do you say those words? In your eyes, other people's lives are so contemptible." Even Jing Chen, who was always calm, had a hint of anger in his voice. Chu Chenzhou looked at himself reflected in the wine glass, said nothing, and his face was calm. Jing Chen gritted his teeth. "No wonder everyone says that Chu Sishan is like an exiled immortal. Generally. Isn't it?" Chu Chenzhou looked up at him and asked rhetorically. Bai Shilai almost bit a piece of silver teeth into pieces. If there was no order in front of him, he would have been able to tear people to pieces on the spot. "Then you are waiting here. Do you still hold a little hope? Can you survive any longer?" "I want to live." Chu Chenzhou still answered simply, not caring whether this would anger the people in front of him. His eyes looked around at the blood-stained people in front of him. Everyone should be like this, in this world, if it is possible. Who doesn't want to live? No one asked him any more. Chu Chenzhou closed his eyes and drank the wine in the cup in one go. A trace of blood ran down his mouth uncontrollably. He wiped it with the back of his hand, tried to stabilize the trembling of his hands, and put it back into the glass. Then, surrounded by a group of people, he left the star viewing pavilion where he had lived for more than 10 years. "Chu Shenzhou!" Someone roared behind him, "A person like you, even if you die and go to the underworld, no one will let you go. Chu Chenzhou turned to look at Bai Shiliai and Jing Chen, but couldn't make a sound. The voice that accompanied him for more than 20 years and brought countless disasters to him and the world finally left him under a glass of wine. Even if you can count the fate of others, you can't see your own tomorrow. Bai Shiliai did not fully answer the marshal's words. Lu Chongming ordered 2 sentences in total, the first is to keep him from dying, and the second is to not contaminate his innocence. And the most talked about, in addition to his divination of life and death, is the unparalleled appearance that is cold and peerless. Let this Lu Kongming's second order be full of charm. Many people vaguely remember that these 2 people were said to have had a very deep friendship a long time ago. Many people even speculated that Chu Cixin would most likely survive this time. A capable person like Chu Chenzhou, no one would really be willing to give up, just look at the 2 previous emperors. Lu Chongming didn't hesitate to answer this, and only answered one sentence, the emperor is still forgiven. No need to say more. The deposed emperor can be forgiven, but this person cannot be left no matter what. Chu Chenzhou knew nothing about these things out of the Guan pavilion. Someone from the control department was ordered to wait for him there. After more than 10 years, he fell into slavery again. The red-hot soldering iron smelled of burnt flesh, leaving a Ming character on his lower back. That was the place he was most afraid of pain, and Lu Chongming really knew better than anyone how to make him suffer the most. Only a brand mark affects the whole body, his legs can't use strength, but the horses in front are holding the ropes tied to him, and he has to step forward as the horses move. The red rope is tied behind the head. The road was crowded with onlookers. For these ordinary people, in the past, Lord Si Shangguan was as high as a god, and only lived in legends, and no one could see it. Nowadays, the immortals are in distress and are dragged through the streets. Even if the war has just passed through the imperial city like now, no one wants to come and take a look. He was able to stagger at first, but the pain in his lower back made his legs tremble, his shirt was soaked with cold sweat, and he was soon dragged to the ground by the horse. Although there are soldiers who are separated by a distance, it can't stop the voices of countless people from coming. That's Tian Guan? I thought he was a with 3 heads and 6 arms. What kind of power are 3 heads and 6 arms? He can kill you without using his hands. He can't kill you by opening his mouth, isn't he still an immortal? Fairy ass. The dog is just a man's power, no one is behind his back, who cares what he says, he is not a dog. Someone tut, the murder is too heavy, I didn't expect to actually be born like this, I am afraid that the gods in the sky will look like this. If he didn't look like this, how could he let the emperor obey him, and it's like this. No wonder. Someone stared and muttered, if he would smile at me. Shut up. Beside him yelled, don't die. I heard that his eyes can see yin and yang and the future, but I don't know if it's true. Who knows, it should be true. Of course, the accompanying officers were curious about this matter, and of course they have already seen it. Now that someone is watching something new together, of course, they are not happy to relieve their boredom, and quickly kicked the side. I didn't hear what they said. Open your eyes. Your throat is hoarse, could you be blind? Chu Chenzou's hands were tied behind his back, he could only pant and crawl on the ground, he was kicked awake in a trance, and slowly opened his eyes. The officer grabbed his hair and forced him to look up. There were crowds of people all around, scrambling to take a closer look. Really? One eye blue and one gold. Let me see, he's looking at me. Chu Chenzhou stared absently at the crowd surging not far away, wanting to say something. He wanted to say, he really envy them, to have such a dull life, to have a home to go back to have someone waiting for them at home, to talk and laugh like this without restraint. All he wanted was to have a place to live and live freely and well. Just. After seeing his eyes, someone hesitated, is it not good, he doesn't really come down to the world, and now we are like this, don't be offended. Don't think blindly. Someone immediately interrupted the man's timidity. How many years did you know about him? Others have been confessed like a dog for a few years. Is he an immortal? He's just a house slave bought for 3 taels of silver. House slave? Him. Of course, how could people in the capital not know about it? I really only came here in the past few years, can you tell me? What's new here? You can find out what's going on when you go around. He sold the very lively Kishan building in Beijing more than 10 years ago. Kishan building? Didn't it collapse long ago? That's right, it's not like you didn't know who fell in love with him later. I heard that Kishan Tower collapsed just to get him into the palace. It's not just that the Kishan building has collapsed, someone interjected, if he hadn't entered the palace, the world would not be in chaos now. SHH. The words behind him were immediately blocked. Tisk tisk, what a curse, whoever buys him will be unlucky. That's not it. So, if I were Marshal Lu, I wouldn't dare to keep him. Marshal Lu. These 3 words fell into my ears, and the lifeless Chu Shenzhou began to tremble. The officer shoved forward as if he was holding filth in his hands, he fell to the ground, propped his head on the ground again, knelt down a little bit, and stood up staggeringly. Chongming. He thought in his heart, taking a difficult step, even if he knew what was waiting for him at the end of the road. There are no narrow transoms in the dark underground. He crouched in a place where he couldn't see a ray of light, he didn't know the age, he could only faintly hear the horrible sound of the torture tool being dragged on the ground. I only know that in a coma and awake with pain to the bone, I have always been hung with a sigh of relief, and I have not died, and I am not allowed to die. 4 months later, the new emperor ascended the throne and gave amnesty to the world. The only person who was not pardoned was Chu Shenzhou. After a few months without the light of day, he tasted all kinds of tastes in prison, and he was barely able to stand up. The soldier who escorted him looked at him with some horror, wondering how this skeleton could still walk. Chu Shenzhou only has the road ahead in his eyes. One more step, and you can see it. In front of the Hall of Central Harmony, there is a high platform specially built for him. Even before the attack on the capital, Lu Chongming swore an oath in front of the battle that if he could enter the Zhuhong Palace gate, he would sacrifice the soul of the dead with the blood of a traitor. When he was bound on the cross-soul breaker platform, he completely lost his strength and could only barely stand by the restraint of the iron chain. The only remaining strength was enough to make him look up and look at the figure walking towards him. For nearly 10 years, they can finally meet again, but they are no longer the teenagers they used to be. He licked the dry lips, the name was already in his mouth, but there was no sound to call it out. However, with only one glance, those flowers that were once illuminated by the sun were blooming brilliantly again. Chu Shenzhou pursed his thin lips, lowered his head with a smile. It's good to see him, it's worth the long wait. It's just the sentence he tried so hard to ask, but he has no chance to ask. It's just that the agreement that once joined hands to ride the horse was empty after all. Chu Sishan. Do you still recognize me? Lu Kongming's feet trembled violently, and even the mian on his head was shaking, disturbing his vision, and he couldn't see far. A blood-stained person. He didn't care about the gazes of the people around him, he tore off the crown and tossed it aside. Jing Chen behind him hurriedly stepped forward and helped him. Your Majesty. Chu Sishan. Look at me. Do you still recognize me? He pushed Jing Chen away and growled sharply. Chu Shenzhou was unable to raise his head and ignored his anger. You dared to do those things back then, why don't you dare to look at me now? Lu Chongming scolded sharply, his right hand shook, and the pitch-black long whip whistled down. After the sound of breaking the air, there was a sound of whipping on the flesh. Chu Shenzhou. Lu Kongming's voice suddenly increased, with a choked sob, and raised his hand again with a sharp whip. Look at me. Look at me. You look up. Head up. Jing Chen couldn't stand it any longer, he stopped Lu Chongming, who seemed to be crazy, and motioned to the person beside him to take a look. After seeing that person trotting over, he nodded to him and whispered, "Your Majesty, he is dead. Chu Shenzhou is dead. He won't die." Without Jing Chen's expected madness, Lu Chongming was stunned for a moment, then suddenly sneered, "How can someone who has no heart die?" He took a few steps back, beckoned, and someone on the side handed over the things prepared earlier. Gold bow, silver arrow. This is what he promised. One day he will show him the free world outside, go to the vast grassland to ride horses, golden bows and silver arrows, red horses. Fill the arrow, open the full moon, and let go. The silver arrow broke through the wind, straight to the heart of the boat. Lu Chongming mechanically repeats the action of opening the bow and releasing the arrow, and his eyes are blurred and clear again and again. Lu Chongming finally stopped. An account. Shenzhou. He knelt on the soul-breaking platform, his head rested on the golden bow, and cried bitterly, "Shenzhouer." It was the coldest weather of the year, and the snow fell silently. There was not even a little wind, and large flakes of snow fell erratically from the sky, like someone was tearing cotton wool in the air. Pedestrians on the road wrapped their collars tightly and hurried past with their heads lowered to prevent these disturbing coldness from getting into their necks. Chu Chenzhou wanted to follow people several times to find a place to avoid the snow, but he retreated several times and said to himself, "I want to wait for him to come back." His voice faded into the dark night. I stretched out my hand, and the condensed white ice crystals fell to the palm of my hand, and then fell to the ground through the palm of my hand. Only my heart is at a loss, as if empty. The sky was getting dark, and there were few pedestrians on the road, so he sat down again under the flagpole, bent his knees and hugged himself. Not because of the cold, but from a very young age, only when I curl up in a ball like this can I feel safe. The drums are ringing, the flowers bloom in March, Ziggy is crying, the small leaves are flying swallows, and the east wind is calling every day. When others couldn't hear his voice, he relieved himself and sang to his body, which was hung on the flagpole beside him. He didn't know why he was standing here, and how he became like this. When someone dragged his body away, he could only follow him blankly and come here. The silver arrow has been pulled out, and the blood has not been cleaned up. Fortunately, it is a cold winter, and it has not rotted for so long. It's been the 14th day since the corpse was displayed. Chongming has no reason not to hate him. Not to mention that in the past many years, many people in the world who have never even seen him have died because of him. This end is also what he deserves. So no resentment. He was just at a loss as to where he should go in the future. Maybe even God hates him for doing too much and punishes him not to reincarnate. Here he is watching himself being reviled and humiliated. But he has never been doing nothing in his life like he is now, nor is he so unrestrained now that he can raise his head and hum a tune to the sky, without worrying about anything. The drums sounded at the 5th watch, the bead curtains were all wet, the snow covered the Tian Shan mountains, the clouds condensed thousands of miles, and there were tourists in the clouds. In the past 10 days, his soul consciousness seems to be getting weaker and weaker, and his memory is getting worse and worse. Repeatedly, from the 1st watch drum to the 5th watch drum, and then from the 5th watch to the 1st watch, tirelessly, I saw the dawn of the sky again. In addition to the dawn, there are many others. Chu Chenzhou stood up facing the sun, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but tick. As if remembering, a long time ago, there was also such a person, standing in front of him in the dazzling backlight of the sun, asked in a laughing voice, "Chu Sishan." It was the first light that came into his life. He ran a few steps forward involuntarily, stretched out his arm to the man, Chongming. But the black knight headed by him and the fast horse passed through his body, and knelt down under the flagpole in the agitated snowflakes. Someone quickly stepped forward and removed the corpse that had been hanging for many days. Lu Chongming knelt on the ground, hugged his already stiff body tightly in his arms, and burst into tears in the bright snow at the beginning of the morning. Chu Chenzhou stood behind him in a daze. The voice was so sad and mournful that he couldn't help but touch his face. It was already a remnant of the soul, and there was no tears to shed. Chongming, why are you crying? He could only reach out and gently stroke Lu Kongming's head. I'm dead, don't cry. Chu Chenzhou raised his gradually lost hands in front of his eyes, closed his eyes with relief, and breathed a sigh of relief. The body is dead, the soul is about to disperse, and he can finally be released. The body is so light that it seems to be flying in the clouds, but shouldn't a person like him go to hell? He didn't know where he was going, he just felt erratic, like a dream of flying before. He would wake up in a blink of an eye, and his body fell uncontrollably. Chu Chenzhou slammed forward, and put his hands on the table in time, not letting himself fall, but was stunned by the things in his hands. That is a fortune-telling bone, something I have not seen for many years. When he was in Kishan building, the host asked him to hold this thing for divination for the guests, although he didn't need it, but the host said it looked more like a divination. In addition to this strange fortune-telling bone, he also saw his own hand. Chu Chenzhou was born a monster, and turned into a soul. He saw the corpse separated from himself, and even experienced such strange things happening. He was still in a daze, and a scolding sounded in front of him, Du Chuan. What's going on? Du Chuan? The owner of Kishan, who has been dead for many years. Compared to Du Chuan, who was still alive, his eyes were looking at the person on the opposite side, a table away from him. Chu Chenzhou curled up with his fingers pinching the bones. It's Pan He. When he was 14 years old, eunuch Pan had only been to Kishan building once, but it was precisely because of this divination that eunuch Pan used him to please the emperor. In less than 2 months from this day, Qi Shenglo disappeared, and he was sent to the palace, and he couldn't help himself. Pan Gong Gong is also the first step in his small trial of killing. Sink the boat. You talk. Du Chuan didn't expect Chu Chenzhou to be stunned suddenly, so he hurriedly shoved him, and bowed to Pan He with a smile on his face. Pan Gong Gong, don't be angry, this child was originally it's a little weird, just wait. Pan He unfolded the folding fan and looked Chu Chenzhou up and down for a moment. Du Chuan, you shouldn't be selling dog meat with these false words to deceive people. Father-in-law is joking, how dare the villain dare? Du Chuan smiled, the villain also told you before, this child was very clever when he was a child, and the bigger he was, the worse it would be. If he can't figure it out. Your lord has a lot of it, so just take a look at it for fun. Pan He is not young anymore. He is not as open to this kind of ghosts and gods as young people. Hearing what he said, he also nodded, this is natural, children's eyes are clean and big. It's normal to not be able to see the smell of fireworks. Chu Chenzhou stared blankly at the two people who should have turned into bones in front of him, then raised his hand and looked at it. It was really his own hand when he was a teenager, with the mask on his face. The covering of the face is also the same as before. But the conversation in front of me was so unfamiliar and completely different from before. The hexagrams on Pan He's body are also very different from before. In the last life, he accurately predicted the hexagram for Pan He going south to get gold, going around Los Angeles. Pan He was skeptical and ordered to go south, making a lot of money, and because he took a detour from Los Angeles and avoided the turmoil in the city, this was why he had a crooked mind. What is the current situation? Could it be that God told him to read the person he hated and the most unforgettable thing in his life again before he was reincarnated, and he also remembered it on the road to forgetting the river? Chu Chenzhou's breathing became rapid, and he couldn't tell whether it was illusory or real for a while. Du Chuan and Pan He's voices and figures seemed to be circling and twisting around them, turning into ghostly voices and screaming, and the scolding sounded unreal. Having a splitting headache. Such a nightmarish person is something he doesn't want to see even in his dreams. If it's a dream, let him do it once. Indulge once. Vent once. He smashed the bone of his right hand to Pan He's face, stepped on the table with the chair, and stepped on Pan He's chest in a scream, rushed out of the door like a fly. In the exclamations and scoldings on the street, he ran all the way. The exhaustion brought by running and the fright of the pedestrians around him were so real that he started to panic again. It was as if everything before was a nightmare for him, and the real one is still selling himself in Kishan Building, and nothing happened. The people from Kishan Building shouted and chased after him, but the fear had made him unable to care about anything. Being able to run on both feet again, breathing the warm air so greedily and thirst, and feeling the beating heartbeat in my chest, whether it is true or false at the moment, is no longer important. Even if it's a dream. But he is still a boy with a thin body after all. Before he could run 2 streets away, the people behind him rushed up like a wolf, overwhelmed him and twisted him. Arms up! Chu Chenzhou raised his head desperately, not caring about the dust rising from the ground choking into his throat, and shouting loudly, "Help! Is there anyone? Help me! What's the matter?" There was a young boy's voice above his head. He was just like a drowning man, eager to grab a life-saving straw, never thought that someone would answer. The sound made his whole body tremble, as if all the strength of his struggle was instantly taken away. So familiar, how could he forget the voice that appeared countless times in his dreams? Chu Shenzhou raised his head involuntarily. In the backlight of the sun, a young man on a horse leaned slightly towards him. "What's going on?" The name was in his mouth, but he never dared to call it out. Restatement. The young man was dressed in brocade, with a smile on his face, and he had an oppressive extravagance that made one dare not look at him. It makes people feel that even if this person does bad things, it is just a wayward joke, and it makes people hate it. Though the people in Kishan Building didn't recognize him, they didn't dare to make trouble because of his style, and the manager stepped forward and responded, "Master Hui, Kishan Building is catching the escaped house slave." The servant next to the boy also listened to him and whispered a few words to him, as if he was explaining what was going on for him. The young man casually dismounted from the horse and watched the servants tie the man up with his hands tied up. Someone ripped off the veil covering the little slave's face, and put the drug-stained sweat towel on his nose and mouth. "Yes," the steward nodded, "young master taught me, yes. I don't know if he saw it wrong." When the thin domestic slave was carried away, he seemed to have been looking at him, and then slowly stopped struggling and closed his eyes. He looked at Su for a moment, and stopped meddling. "Let's go." The manager gave a few nods, and was about to leave when someone asked, "What happened to that child just now?" "Young master has good eyesight," the steward replied diligently, "his eyes are natural and very rare. If you want to see this little monster, you can come to Kishan Building another day and have a good tea. The wine is good, you can look at it however you want." Bai Xian couldn't help laughing. "Okay, I know you are an iron rooster." "Nonsense," the young man raised his whip lightly and continued to walk forward. "If I am an iron rooster, can I still be slaughtered by you for so many years?" Bai Xian also rode a horse and followed him slowly. "Chongming, is this the first time you see the child just now?" Lu Chongming raised his eyebrows. "You know him? Not only do you know, it was a scene in the capital earlier, you haven't been to Kishan Building." Bai Xian stopped in time, regretting in his heart the time Chongming went to Kishan Building. They brought it, that is, that day, something happened to the Lu family. He glanced at Lu Chongming, seeing that there was no reaction, he continued. "I heard that this kid ran away every few minutes, making the chickens jump around. I haven't seen him for a while. I thought he was beaten to death long ago." Lu Chongming nodded in agreement. "After running so many times and still alive, it doesn't look like Du Quan's heart, it seems that he has some value. In the end, he is a businessman, and he has a bright mind in this regard." Bai Xian didn't know whether to praise him or hurt him. The odd character in Kishan Building was changed for him, and it was listed on the board. "Gua, it is said that there is nothing that cannot be fulfilled. Lu Chongming sneered, non-committal. Bai Yixian knew his attitude towards this kind of thing, and smiled, it's just fun, who would take it seriously? Someone invited my father to drink a few years ago, and Shilei and I happened to follow. That time it was the first time I saw him in Kishan building. Lu Chongming was silent for a moment, then his attention turned, uncle has the patience to listen to these things. It's just for entertainment, what can I do if I'm impatient? Eunuch you. Lu Chongming slowly restrained his smile, and then? A divination? What is the result? This person is best at pleasing people, how can he invite his uncle to drink? How can there be any result? Today in the world who doesn't know what is the most fun and the most profitable, just in this capital, I don't know how many people claim to be half-immortals, fortune-tellers, let alone fortune-telling. That kid does look a little weird. Lu Chongming breathed a sigh of relief, I have heard that Du Chuan of Kishan building is greedy, and it is not unusual for him to do such a thing. So Du Chuan is a good person. He said in advance that if everything is safe and there are no major ups and downs, there will be no results. I'm really smothered by lard, and everyone else is stupid. Isn't that true? I don't want to find someone smarter to lie to. Du Chuan should learn from you. Bai Yixian laughed, that child is like a little mute. Will only shake his head. My father saw that he was so frightened that he was trembling, it was pitiful, and he even asked us to take him out to play. Shilei should like it very much, he likes to play with the little guys. He was afraid to raise his head, he didn't cry or laugh, he kept kneeling on the ground and refused to get up, he would only kowtow when he asked anything, which was very boring, and we never saw him again. It's his time. Lu Chongming deserved to be absent-minded. Anything on your mind? Bai Xian teased him, are you also active and planning to do some divination business? Lu Chongming glanced at him, the things of ghosts and gods cannot be trusted. Bai Xian laughed, if you don't believe in ghosts and gods, why did you specifically ask me to go to the Nanluo temple today? It is not credible, nor is it disrespectful. Lu Chongming smiled, Xian, do you remember the dream I told you before? Is something wrong? Bai Xian was stunned for a moment, is the amulet no longer working? This cousin was seriously ill when he was a child. If it wasn't for the abbot of Nanluo Chanyuan who came to recite the sutras, he almost couldn't survive. Since then, the cousin would have the same dream again and again. With the amulet, it is slightly better. Lu Chongming closed his eyes and slowly recalled that he remembered every detail of this dream, as real as if he had experienced it himself. In my dream it was still in early April. I was in Jingxi Academy. I first came out of the library door, and then passed through the backing pavilion. There was a copper bell on the pavilion, and the begonias around it opened. It was in full bloom, and then I walked past the waterside pavilion, and finally walked to the corridor on the south side. Bai Yixian has heard this dream more than once. They have all studied in Jingxi Academy. Chongming will even go back occasionally to help gentlemen manage their younger brothers and sisters. But in this dream, the corridor seems to have no end, and my cousin will keep walking, until dawn and wake up. But the situation in this dream was different. I kept walking forward and saw the corner of the corridor. Under the sun, Bai Yixian felt a little cold. Have you come to the end? Yes, not only did I come to the end, I also turned the corner and saw the second child of Yao Shilang's family and his accomplices bullying people. Why dream of him? Bai Yixian was puzzled, but this dream was real enough. Yao Shilang's second son liked to bully honest children in the academy. Who are they bullying? Lu Chongming pondered for a while. They ran away after seeing me, and indeed left a person kneeling on the ground. I seemed to call him. Is that someone you know? No. Lu Chongming shook his head, not quite sure, I don't know the name in the dream, and I woke up before he looked up. Longing for. Seeing that he was no longer speaking, Bai Yixian whipped his horse lightly with a horse whip. Go, and ask the abbot. The South Road Temple is not far from the capital." The horses galloped past, and they arrived before noon, but unfortunately the abbot was in retreat, and they did not see anyone. When he came out of the mountain temple, Lu Chongming looked at the mountains in the distance for a long time. It is early spring, and the buds on the branches have not yet emerged, only the bare trunk can be seen. Can turn into a fire. The fire swept from a distance once again, burning all the way to the star viewing pavilion below. There were chaotic footsteps again on the steps, as if many people were running up. This familiar situation is dizzying. Are Jing Chen and Bai Shili here? Are you going to be dragged to the streets again? I have to endure the endless torture again, but goodbye again. And then? Will he still be back in front of Pan Hyuk? Which picture is dreaming? Which one is true? In the semi-drowsy state, Chu Chenzhou hadn't figured out these things yet. When a ladle of cold water was splashed on his face, he gasped a few times, spat out the water in his mouth, and completely woke up. In a place he knows. This is the Kishan building. According to the old man, this place was originally a firewood house, but it always returned to the tide, so it was abandoned. He has been a regular here since childhood. Although he knew that the deed of prostitution was the handprint of his father's hand, he had nowhere else to go except home. That was the only place he could go back, where he tried everything he could to escape. It's a pity that he is too young to know where his home is. And his appearance is too obvious, everyone knows that this child belongs to Kishan building. Chu Shenzhou lowered his head and saw his feet off the ground. The shirt has been stripped, and he knows what will happen to him without looking up at the hands hanging from the top of his head by the thick hemp rope. Little beast! A loud shout sounded in front of him, and someone kicked his belly. Since he came to Kishan building, he has been handed over to Director Lin, and sometimes the punishment is still done by Director Lin himself. The person he relies most on is Steward Lin, but apart from Du Chuan, the person he fears most is Steward Lin. While being dragged through the street, he saw the grey-haired butler Lin following him in the crowd, wiping tears secretly. Now that I can see him again, Chu Chenzhou is pleased and excited on the one hand, but confused and terrified on the other. Whether it is the pain in the body or the person in front of him, it is so real. Is this not a dream? Don't you die? Hit me to death. Steward Lin used his eyes to signal to the next person not to do anything, while persuading him. Yes, he was confused for a while, but it's useless for you to beat him to death now, and Pan Gong Gong, you always have to give an explanation, right? It's a pity, I'm afraid that the father-in-law can't find a place to vent his anger, and it will be bad for you. Du Chuan was panting with red eyes, knowing that Manager Lin was right, but he couldn't swallow the bad breath. Snatch the whip! Listening to the wind, Chu Chenzhou tilted his head in a conditioned reflex. The whip went from the side of his face and went from his collarbone to his ribs. When he saw blood, he couldn't breathe in pain, but he still gritted his teeth and said nothing. What Du Chuan hated the most was how silent he was. He hated to leave a sentence and went out. Use a heavy whip and beat me hard. If Pan Gong Gong can't explain it, no one will be better. Hearing the footsteps outside the door gradually receding, Lin Guanqi was relieved and relieved, watching the drop of blood slowly dripping out from the welt in front of him, a little distressed, and even more hated for iron not steel. Shenzhou, you say how old you are, why are you still so ignorant? You have been beaten in vain? How can you do such a confused thing? What are you thinking? Does it bother you? You, Steward Linear. Chu Chenzhou's face was pale in pain, his lips were trembling, and he still held back his mouth. How old am I this year? Steward Lin was a little surprised. He didn't expect to blame so much. What he heard would be this question, are you confused? Are you still entertaining me? You are 14, don't you remember? Chu Chenzhou lowered his head and stopped talking. It is indeed 14 years old, the day he met Pan He. But now, because he unexpectedly returned to this turning point in his life. He did not make a hexagram for Pan Hebu like before, and what happened after that seems to be different from before. Steward Lin shook his head, stopped talking nonsense to him, and instructed to the side. The shopkeeper said, "Use a heavy whip, at least to make Pan Gong Gong face." He sighed, "Follow the old rules first, double it." Old rules. Chu Chenzhou was in a trance for a moment. These rules and expressions seemed to be like a lifetime away, but after all, they were things he learned from his childhood, and no matter how long it took, he would still be recited. The thug behind him took care of the whip, and when he raised his hand, it was a whip. Chu Chenzhou's body swayed with the whip, and the cold sweat instantly cooled his forehead. The burning pain was so real and unbearable. He knows what double the old rules means. After the two whips, he slowly adjusted his breath before replying in a low voice, "First, it is forbidden to flee. You also know that the first rule is to prohibit escape? What did you think about before?" Manager Lin was angry, anxious, and distressed. Continue reading. The two heavy whips landed on the thin back again. Chu Chenzhou gasped and said with trembling lips, "Second, it is forbidden to lie, and third, it is forbidden to hide, fourth, it is forbidden to refuse to answer. Come on, read on." Steward Lin ordered that he didn't need to wake him up. He just pulled his feet, and after finishing the number, he called someone to wipe the blood on his body. Du Chuan must be reluctant to give people medicine, but Director Lin secretly prepares it every time. The hands and feet of the person who applied the medicine were not light, and when they touched the rolled flesh, Chu Chenzhou was woken up by the pain and turned around again. Steward Lin watched the doctor busy, took the sweat towel from someone else's hand, and wiped the sweat on his face and the blood on the corner of his mouth. "Shenzhou, the shopkeeper is very angry today. He didn't say anything, and I didn't dare to let you down without authorization. And you've been injured before and after, so you can't lie down. Just bear with it. If he can pass the level of eunuch Pan, maybe he will soon be relieved." "Thank you, Steward Linear." Chu Chenzhou was so angry that he insisted on answering. Someone went to untie the rope tied to one side and lowered him slowly until his feet were on the ground, and the rope became entangled again. "That's all I can do. You can do it yourself. Tomorrow is the big day for the host, and I will bring you meals." The pain and numbness from the wrist all the way to the shoulder came in waves, making the feeling of the welt touching every inch of skin more clearly. With the pain, it made him feel more real and alive. He finally had time to sort things out. But he is really alive now, not only returning to his youth, but also walking on a different path than before. He did not divination for Pan He, nor would he be offered to the palace by Pan He. Did even God have mercy on him, so he gave him another chance? Or God punished him for doing too many wrongs, made him suffer as a slave again, and made up for his sins? But no matter what, he is alive after all. No matter how unbelievable, his fresh life cannot deceive people. Since the world allows monsters like him to exist, what else is impossible? Chu Chenzhou clenched his teeth tightly, but he couldn't control the slight trembling of his body. It has been many years since he laughed once and never shed a tear. In everyone's eyes, he is just a demon without any emotion. Now, he can finally cry unreservedly once, for the painful past, the last life he couldn't help himself, and the unknown future. For the new students. A low sobbing sounded in the silent darkness, but it was the only free vent for a long time. "I don't know how long I cried, and finally fell asleep." In the early morning of the next day, there were many fewer people walking around in the backyard, and most of them went to the front to join in the fun. "Although I just offended eunuch Pan yesterday, the auspicious day cannot be changed. In this way, I am afraid that when I announce the crime to eunuch Pan in the future, it will inevitably cost a lot of words and management. No wonder Du Chuan is so angry." Chu Chenzhou also remembers this day. In his last life, he properly divination for Gong Gong Pan, and the young master also greeted the bride in a down-to-earth way. Enough! At that time, he was ashamed of being stared at by people in turn. Now think about it, what is that? He smiled bitterly in his heart and slowly relaxed his body. He would rather be hanged and beaten here than in the palace. However, since Pan Hyak's affairs have undergone such a big change, maybe he can be allowed to take a little luck and can no longer follow the old path of the previous life. When it was almost noon, there was a faint sound of liveliness coming from afar. Such a situation was not unfamiliar to him. There are too many festivals in the palace to count, and in the last few years, he rarely attended. More often, he sat alone in the dark, listening to the flute outside. Afternoon, Manager Lin hurriedly pushed open the door of the woodshed with his confidence. When I tried to ask for mercy, I rushed over. In such a long time, Chu Chenzo's whole body was almost unconscious, and he couldn't hold it anymore. As soon as the rope was loosened, his legs became weak and he fell to the ground. Steward Lin also watched Chu Chenzo grow up, but unfortunately he couldn't be the master in many things. Seeing his face at this time, he was busy with the quilt he brought on the ground. Shenzhou, it's busy outside, it's not good for you to go out like this, the master should be angry when he finds out. You should rest here for a while, after the night is settled, I will let people carry you back. Thank you, Steward Linear. Chu Chenzo crawled sideways on the mattress, and took the hand of Steward Lin and drank the wedding wine given by the master. The alcohol is not strong, but he hasn't eaten anything for a long time, and his stomach hurts from the burning. Chu Chenzo couldn't get up, so he could only reluctantly thank him, watching Manager Lin close the door and leave. He was so hungry that he couldn't think about anything else, so he lowered his head and hurriedly stuffed a mouthful of rice in his mouth. He choked while eating. He chewed hard, and as soon as he swallowed, he heard the Steward Lin outside the door diligently greet people. Good afternoon, Shizi, why are you here? It's busy in front of you? Why don't you like it? It's a bit noisy, the second brother said. Come out and walk. Hearing this, the person who spoke up did not seem to be the prince. Steward Lin smiled, there is nothing here, how about I take the prince and the general to the lake in the back? It's quiet and the air is good. No need. A voice sounded, what about that weird kid here, the one with different eyes, why didn't you see him come out? Chu Chenzo's breathing stuck in his throat. When he heard the name Shizi, he should have guessed who was coming, and that little general was Bai Shilei, who poisoned himself with a glass of wine in the Guan pavilion. What about that weird kid here, the one with the different eyes, why didn't you see him come out? Steward Lin knew who the other party was talking about, and quickly replied, it's really unfortunate, I'm sick. Bai Shilei asked bluntly, did you get sick so soon? Didn't you run around on the street yesterday? This. Manager Lin was embarrassed, little General Bai. What are you doing? My second brother is just curious. I want to take a look. Do I need money? Seeing his expression, Bai Shilei knew that he was fooling them. I don't dare. Manager Lin looked back at the firewood house along the way, knowing that he couldn't escape, so he had to bite the bullet and tell the truth. He was disobedient yesterday and was beaten, now it doesn't look good, for fear of offending the two nobles. Where people are, I will take a look. He curled up into a ball, lying on his side on the dirty bedding that couldn't see the color, as if he had fallen asleep. Perhaps because of a bad life, that person looks small, more like a child than a teenager. There are welts all over the naked and thin shoulders, and some places are still with fresh blood. They have not healed yet, and there is hardly a single piece of intact skin. Bai Shilei also followed into the door. What is this place? Why is it so bad? Brother Xiao Chu, wake up, get up quickly. Chu Chenzo complained in his heart. He pretended to sleep before the door opened, just hoping Lu Chongming could leave here. What if he has more love? Not to mention their current identities are different, why should he have unnecessary thoughts and worry in his life? Go to sleep. Brother Xiao Chu, get up, I've seen Shizi and General Bai. Linear. Lin Manager. Chu Chenzhou could only pretend to have just woken up from a coma, turned over and sat up with difficulty, propped up his arms, moved his knees, lowered his head and slowly crawled towards the two of them. The sound of footsteps approached him, and in his lowered line of sight, a pair of brocade boots with rusted plum blossoms soon appeared. I have seen Shizi. Steward Lin was shocked, and before the nobleman got angry, he slapped him in the face. Damn, look at what you did. Chu Chenzhou was beaten and fell to one side, and he didn't care about the pain on his face. He even spit out 2 mouthfuls of blood, and then he gasped for relief. He got up to make amends. He stretched out his hand tremblingly to wipe the blood on the shoes. No need to wipe, said a familiar young voice above his head, asking him, what's your name? His 10 fingers on the ground curled up slightly, knelt back again, lowered his head and replied softly, slave. It's called Chu Chenzhou. One hand supported his arm to stabilize his body, and another hand supported his chin, making him raise his head. In the eyes of each other, more than 10 years of time go back in the blink of an eye. This face, this shallow smile are so familiar. Although he is the emperor's pro-pointed Si Shangguan, his cowardly appearance is exactly what some of the aristocratic families in the academy like to bully. Go out. He couldn't figure out what he had done wrong, so he could only kneel on the ground and shrink into a ball. He raised his head and looked at the shadow in the backlight with tears in his eyes. At that time, none of them thought that this encounter would be the beginning of chaos in the world. Lu Chongming is also looking at the person in front of him. Although I hurriedly glanced at Chu Shenzhou who escaped on the street a while ago, I didn't really see it. Now being stared at so closely by these bewitching eyes, it seemed as if a hole had been pierced through. These eyes only met him for a moment, then lowered their eyes and looked at the ground, like a treasure that is not easy to show, and disappeared in a flash. The small pointed chin rests in his hand, like a piece of soft nephrite still such a small child. The sight is that a terrifying high raised scar crossed the bridge of the nose from the left cheek, and climbed all the way to the right eye. Except for this most obvious one, there are more than 10 crisscrossing deep scars on the face. The deep and shallow scars ruined this face. Lu Chongming could even imagine how the whip wielder at the time was fuming, and even deliberately landed on his face. Second brother, Bai Shili I looked at him half squatting still, pinching his nose and urging, would you like to go? It smells so bad here, my brother can't find us in a while, it's time to worry. N. Lu Chongming took out a handkerchief from his arms and dipped Chu Chenzhou's mouth with blood before standing up. Looking at the person in front of him bowing his head and kneeling at his feet, for some reason, he always felt uncomfortable. Or should I say that this person just looked at himself calmly, but kneeling here so humbly, as if there is always a sense of disobedience. He glanced at the porcelain bowl on the ground, which contained half a bowl of mixed vegetables and rice. He eats this. Steward Lin rubbed his fingers in his sleeves nervously. Master Shi, don't tell the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper only said to put him down and reward him with some wine, but not food. Here's a little bit I smuggled in. Lu Chongming frowned. What does put him down mean? Steward Lin realized that he had made a blunder, but he didn't dare to talk nonsense about the prince's question, so he had to answer. The man has been hanging here since he was caught yesterday, and he just put it down and lay down. On. Is this injury also from yesterday? Yes. Manager Lin did not dare to meet Lu Chongming's gaze, and Kikai replied, I hit 64 whips. Hearing what he said, Bai Shili couldn't help but tut his tut, this Du Chuan is too mean, aren't you afraid of killing people? Manager Lin responded and did not dare to speak more. Lu Chongming stood for another moment, took out a small silver coin from the purse at his waist, stuffed it in Chu Chenzhou's hand together with the handkerchief, turned and left. It was not until the wooden door was closed again that Chu Chenzhou slowly straightened up, moved back to the mattress with difficulty and lay down, rubbing the silver thorn in his palm. Although it was cold, wrapped in a familiar smell on the handkerchief, he seemed to be able to touch a little warmth, then put the handkerchief on the tip of his nose and bit his lips lightly. When Lu Chongming walked quickly to the front hall, Bai Shilai was still babbling, "This Du Chuan is too ruthless, how can he play like this, he looks younger than me." Click. There are so many dead people on the post. Bai Shilai shrank his neck. Their family would never buy slaves. Even if his father won the battle and brought the captives back to become slaves, he would never leave a few in the house. This also. This is too cruel, isn't it? Lu Chongming looked into the distance silently, and sighed as if he was talking to himself. On the one hand, without cultivating morality, he regards people as livestock, cattle and horses. While begging for God's blessing, funny. Bai Shilai didn't know what he was talking about, so he couldn't answer, so he could only follow. Before she reached the front yard, Bai Xian hurriedly confronted him, "Where have you two gone?" Lu Chongming sent Bai Shilai to play elsewhere, and he and Bai Xian stood in the courtyard. "I just went to the back with Shilai and took a look at the child." "No wonder you are willing to give Du Chuan a face today to join in the fun." Bai Xian understood who he was talking about. "What? Want to buy him back? Don't think about it, I heard that the little boy monsters are no longer able to fortune-telling." Bai Xian knew him well, and knew that he was not someone who liked to watch fresh and lively. "Chongming, what's the matter? Why do you suddenly care about him so much?" Lu Chongming knew that he couldn't hide it, and he didn't plan to hide it. "Shi Yan, last night, that dream was a little more." He looked at the begonia tree with bones in the courtyard. The man under the corridor raised his head. The man under the cloister raised his head. Only in this way can the explanation make sense, and why Chong suddenly wanted to come and see. "I didn't see the appearance clearly, I only saw the eyes clearly, they are yin-yang demon pupils, there is nothing wrong." Lu Chongming pursed his lips and smiled, "Don't be nervous, maybe I just met suddenly during the day, and the impression was so deep that I dreamed about it at night. Chongming, let's go to Nanlu Temple another day." Bai Xian looked serious, "You must go. You can rest assured, I will take care of myself." Lu Chongming smiled and patted his shoulder, "Shi Yan, you are a few years older than me, why are you so impatient?" "Chongming!" Bai Xian shouted, and he didn't know which sentence to choose. "Don't plan to join the job. My dad asked me to, and I said I just want to be a businessman, make money, count the money, and don't want to get involved in the muddy water." "What did your uncle say?" "My father said it, but he didn't want me to mess with it." Lu Chongming smiled when he saw his friend's disappointed eyes. "Let my uncle not give up hope. It's on me. Moon gains are losses, and some things can't be greedy too much." Seeing him, he was about to leave. Bai Xian followed a few steps, and asked sharply, "You said that you have no intention of making trouble for your career, and you are in this position, how do you know that no one will come to provoke you?" "What? Just put up with it. What about your brother? Just let it go." Lu Chongming did not turn around, only when he heard the word brother, he stopped and left silently. Everything that happens outside has nothing to do with Chu Shenzhou. Du Guangsu was so angry this time that he didn't let anyone carry him back, but just let him lie in the woodshed for 3 or 4 days. This set of breathing and breathing methods was asked for him from General Bai. 4 months of torture. The harsh treatment of Du Chuan is not important at the moment. The most important thing in front of Chu Shenzhou is how to pass the test of Pan Gong Gong. He ran into the street recklessly that day, and many people saw it. Now, half of the people in the capital have heard that this boy who used to have low eyebrows smashed eunuch Pan's face with a fortune-telling bone. Pan, he has a very good face, this incident is like tearing his face off and throwing it on the ground. Things are bad. Du Chuan still relied on getting to know some officials on weekdays and maintained a noble and reserved attitude. Now that he has entered Eunuch Pan's house, he has to keep a low voice. He stood on the side and watched Eunuch Pan casually reading a book. He had been standing there for a few hours. He didn't dare to move, and he had to continue chatting with Eunuch Pan from time to time. Hate not to kill. Outside the door, Chu Chenzhou has also been kneeling for a few hours. The wounds on the front chest and back began to close and scar under the action of the wound medicine. It was itchy and painful. The gravel under the knees seemed to be digging into the bones, grinding the flesh and blood. Kneeling for too long, my mind was dizzy. The people on both sides hurriedly dragged him up and knelt down, but the people in the room had already heard the sound here. Pan He put down the book he read for a long time, and seemed to notice someone outside. Yo, look at me, only then did you see that shopkeeper Du brought someone here. It's okay when I'm sick, I didn't know anything when I was sick, I didn't want to offend you, I already beat him hard. As long as you can put out the fire, you can kill him or cut him. Just a cheap slave, what do I care about? Pan He's chubby face showed a kind smile. Treasurer Du's business is doing well, I heard the liveliness on Xinghua Street, just looking at the 3 floors of shopkeeper Du. Du Chuan groaned in his heart, and said with a smile, Pan Gong Gong is too famous, but it's just to make some money. He was very tight on money and money. As soon as he heard Pan He's words, he knew that the other party wanted to take a piece of the pie from him. I didn't expect such a shameless person. This was obviously an opportunity in trouble, a lowly slave caused trouble, and he also expected him to use the 3rd floor's collection share in exchange. Don't even think about it. Live money. Pan He laughed. Yeah, you see so many mouths inside and out, all pointing at me to eat. The other party didn't say it clearly. Du Chuan also pretended to be stupid. You have a lot, don't talk to me. Children care. Calculating? There are so many things in the city these days. Didn't shopkeeper Du hear what he was talking about? Yes, did I bring someone to you to make amends? Du Chuan hurriedly shouted to the door, come here. The people in the yard were busy carrying the Chu Shenzhou over and knelt outside the threshold. Looking at the young boy kneeling not far away, Pan He was no longer in a hurry to mention the matter of splitting the account. Because of the emperor's preference, fortune tellers spread all over the world, and everyone knows that these are just fun tricks to cheat money. Going to Kishan building is just to please him. Please come over and have fun. A creepy feeling. Somehow he was a little nervous. Du Chuan, did he bring his gadgets? Du Chuan was stunned for a moment, only to realize that the gadget was talking about the bones, and nodded hurriedly, bring it. Don't worry, don't look at him like a dumb, as long as he can speak, the words are all right. If there is no hexagram, congratulations to the father-in-law for peace and happiness every day, no disasters and no disasters. Having said that, he knows too well how many times the fortune-telling has gone empty over the years, and he is very nervous. However, Chu Chenzhou raised a heart in his throat. He has a secret. He has a secret that only he knows. Since he was 9 years old, knowing that he could not escape and had nowhere to go, he slowly began to resist silently. After the master became accustomed to his divination, he could only reluctantly accept that he was taciturn and shook his head again and again. Du Chuan only thought that he had lost the spiritual energy of his childhood and could not predict divinations, but he didn't know that his shaking his head included not only not knowing, but also refusing to answer. Not only did he not want to be Du Quan's cash cow, but, even if he was ignorant, he knew that if he said some things, he might cause a big disaster. In this way, by accident, he was kept safe and sound until he was 14 years old, until he made a hexagram for Pan Hebu. But this little trick can deceive Du Chuan, who is all about money, but he can't hide it from people like Pan He. Du Chuan didn't know he thought so much, so he just urged, Shenzhou, what are you doing? Divination. Chu Chenzhou squeezed the fortune-telling bones in his hand, silently looked at the feet inside the threshold, then slowly raised his eyes and saw Pan He. Even the hexagram is different from the previous life. He remembered that at that time, eunuch Pan had a bright face, wealth and luck, and the hexagram said that there was gold in the south, and he went around Los Angeles. But this time where the whale waves rise, near the shade of willows. His hexagrams will never be wrong, but if he wants to know what the hexagrams say, he can only guess based on his limited knowledge, so even when he was a child, he only said, puzzled. What's more, in the face of Pan He couldn't say anything out of his mouth. This silent gaze made Pan He feel a little chilly, and it wasn't the first time he went to a fortune-telling place to listen to it, and he was so uncomfortable. A few months ago, he had the opportunity to collect a shipment of goods with people, thinking of making a lot of money. Recently, the day of returning home is approaching, and he has been waiting for news. For this kind of goods, he has seen a lot of half-immortals these days, and heard a lot of good things, which can be regarded as a comfort for himself. Now, in the silence of a child, I am afraid. Shenzhou. Du Chuan didn't hear the sound for a while, so he couldn't help but kicked over, mute. Is there any result? Speak. This kick failed. Chu Chenzhou suddenly dodged sideways, jumped up like a lifeless man, and smashed the bones into Pan He's face. The noon sun was very bright, and it shone softly through the window paper, making people lazy. Lunch has been eaten, many people take a nap at this time, and it is quiet everywhere. Lu Chongming likes to slowly turn over the accounts and documents in such silence. He has been interested in the account of silver since he was a child, at least far more interesting than being mixed in filthy water. It is said that he also caught abacus and silver ingots at the birthday banquet. In the past, my brother used this as a trick to laugh at him. Since that year, this reunion festival has become the most reluctant day for the family to mention. On this day, his brother was sent home, but he was dead. The Dingling Hills were rampant with bandits, and no one thought that they would hijack the head of the Prince of Anding Ho Shizi, his brother and dozens of guards. No one survived. He never had the chance to be irritated by his brother again. Bai Xian's words seemed to be roaring in his ears again. What about your brother? Just let it go. Of course he didn't believe that any robber would be so bold as to kill the Prince of Anding, but he didn't dare to think that anyone would dare to kill his brother. The emperor also sent people to search for them. He and his father even went to the prison to pick up people and tortured those wicked people, but they found nothing. For 4 years, he spread the dark halls in all directions, especially paying attention to the surroundings of Dingling Hill, but he still didn't get the slightest clue. He didn't even know which direction to go. Find. Does he really have to admit that his brother was just out of luck and was killed by robbers who wanted to make money? But even if you are not reconciled, what can you do? 4 years later, how many valuable leads are left? Lu Chongming clenched the pen in his hand, and after a long period of ecstasy, he patiently turned the pages. It was all information collected from various shops. Even if the hope was small, he's going to catch it too. After reading a few copies, he took out a piece of paper to take a closer look, somewhat surprised. Liu's family not only has a lot of business on the ground, but also often travels by water. This season, the sea is stormy, and he has not received any news in time for more than half a month, and he is considering whether to send someone to respond. The letter was indeed to report safety. Although the Liu family fleet encountered heavy rain, luckily the boatmen were experienced and the boat was big enough to arrive at the ferry safely. Not only that, they also picked up another ship at sea, and the people and cargo on board were half safe. An account book is attached to the back of the letter, which not only records the in and out of the money, but also the number of people rescued, their identities, the catalogue of the cargo and the owner behind them. Pan He. Lu Chongming paused when he saw the name. As the Prince of Stability, not being an official does not mean that he can break away from these people. This Pan He is one of several godsons that Yu Gonggong received. He recognized a godfather at a young age. It is really shameless, but Yu Gonggong is the closest to the emperor. Eunuch. Some relationships should still be sold. Lu Chongming smiled and circled Pan He's name. This father-in-law Pan has recently become famous in Beijing. Even when they were drinking together, they would say that Pan He was not only smashed in the face by the little monster with a fortune-telling bone, but also as the chest stepped on. Pan Hyuk's expression at that time must be very wonderful. He couldn't help but think of the little boy curled up lying on the ground, thinking of those bright and calm eyes. Shi Yan said before that the child was very timid. How could he suddenly become so daring? Is it really crazy? When he threw out the fortune-telling bone in his hand, Chu Chenzhou knew that he would not survive. His hands were tied behind his back, and the rope around his neck was hanging from his neck, so he could only stand on tiptoe desperately. He straightened up, stealing a hard breath from the rope around his neck. In a trance, it seems that he is still stuck in a dark prison day and night, being stuffed in a shackle, and being tortured endlessly. Lu Chongming wanted him to live, and Pan Hyuk wanted him to die. Injured Pan He's face again, and didn't intend to live again. The life of a humble person is just a little face for someone else. I hated and resented before. I hated why my parents gave birth to him since they didn't want me. I hated all the injustices, but in the end, he had no strength at all. I once thought that as long as I could live, it was fine. But after the man disappeared, he really became a man made of stone. Like outsiders say, he is cold-blooded and cold-hearted. Experience a lifetime of ups and downs, life or death, it doesn't matter to him. Chu Chenzhou felt as if the surroundings were vast, and for some reason, he only remembered 4 words, forgetting the river is hard to cross. Are you someone who can't even get through Wangchuan? I remember a long time ago, the man who named him once said that he did not belong here, just like the stars in the sky fall on the mortal world. If this is the case, what is he coming to the world for? Vaguely, it seemed that there were layers of onlookers who were booing and wanting him to die quickly. It seemed that he flew away from the body when he was about to die. The whole person was floating in the ice water, shivering with cold, suddenly east and west, not knowing which direction to go. During this ups and downs, his body moved upwards, as if someone had picked him up, the elegant warmth enveloped him, and there was a nostalgic atmosphere surrounding him. Who are you? He struggled to wake up from the nightmare, but he couldn't open his eyes, he could only hear his low-pitched question, is it you, is it you? Reinstatement. Reinstatement. No one answered him, and he fell asleep in the good smell. When I woke up again, it was time to go to bed at night, and I could hear the familiar sound of walking outside. He saw the beams above his head that had been gnawed in half by rats, the tattered window paper was rustled by the wind on the narrow transom, and the one next to the bed had not been cleaned for a long time. The curtain, covered with his own quilt, was as thin as a sheet of paper. When she turned over gently, the old wooden board creaked. Everything that happened before seemed like a dream of yesterday. This is his residence in Kishan building. It is only the size of a bed. The wooden box under the bed is for daily change of clothes and utensils. Other than that, there is nothing else. They were crowded like this, living in this filthy big room in the west courtyard. He lay on his back, listening to the voice of a woman whimpering and cursing a few compartments away, and finally remembered. When I think of it, I shy away from divination, but why did I make that terrible divination for Pan Hebu? In order to leave the child to be sold for the woman, he went to beg the master, in exchange for earning 2,000 taels within a month, begging the master not to let the mother and son separate. Chu Chenzhou covered his eyes with the back of his hands, and felt that the skin quickly became wet, and something cold slipped from the corner of his eyes to the pillow. He couldn't save anyone, including himself. No one bothered to come to see what was happening on his side. People like them don't know when there will be a spare bed left, or they will be sold, or they will die. Anyway, it won't be long before new people move in. I can't take care of myself, how can I have the energy to take care of others? Although Chu Chenzhou has lived for a long time, he has always been taciturn and rarely speaks to people. He curled up in this corner as if he did not exist. This time, he didn't expect to be alive, not even himself. He stretched out his hand and looked at the bruises on his arms that were strangled by the hemp ropes through the weak light through the curtains, and a ring on his neck was also frayed, which was in severe pain. What happened at Pan he was not a dream either. Who saved him? Why save him? Chu Chenzhou put his hand on the tip of his nose. The good smell, like the sun-baked sycamore flower, was so familiar that he wanted to cry. Is it clear? But how? Second brother. Second brother. No need to look up, just listening to the voice, Lu Chongming knew who was coming. The man didn't hear a reply. He stepped over the threshold of the study, and shouted again, "Second brother, you are here, why shouldn't I say anything?" One person behind him smiled and said, "You keep yelling, and you're so loud, even if Chongming responds, you won't be able to hear it." Bai Shilai sat on the chair with his on his back, stubbornly stuck his neck and didn't look at him. "I don't listen to you, my name is Second Brother." "What bastard, I'm your brother." Bai Xian was furious. Lu Chongming couldn't help but smile, and only when these two people came over would his study become so lively. "You two are not worth it today." Bai Xian also found a seat by the window. "I'm taking a rest today, what kind of duty is he? It's just that my father is afraid that he will be idle, so he will be stuffed in the army." "Stay. I also have something to do every day. It's not just stuff." Bai Shilai protested. "Of course it's business." Bai Shilai didn't give his brother an envoy. "I can even take my troops out. It's not like you, who walks around the capital every day." "Hey, say more." Seeing that his brother was about to beat up, Bai Shilai slipped behind Lu Chongming. "Second brother, am I right?" Lu Chongming was pulled by his clothes, leaned on the back of the chair and flicked a finger on his forehead. "Hot, go get a glass of water." "It's hot." Bai Xian wiped the sweat from his forehead. "The weather is already so hot before summer, and it will be even more difficult in summer. Look at you, you don't look like a prince of a prince, you are a profiteer." Lu Chongming is not ashamed. "I am originally, up and down the capital, who said I am not?" "Look at you," Bai Xian pointed at him from a distance, "with so much money, how expensive are you planning to marry?" Lu Chongming sneered and said proudly, "Jingui is not Jingui, but there is no one I can take a fancy to." "Hey! You can't say it so absolutely. There is a saying that one thing falls into another. You don't know, because you haven't touched it yet." "Yes." Bai Shilai, seeing the needle, also echoed, "Look at my father, it's not being controlled by my mother." Bai Xian took a sip and sighed comfortably. "I came here today to ask you, have you received the post from King Qi, and are you going?" He had a hard time, and he finally returned to Beijing. "It's good to get together." Before waiting for anyone to say anything, Lu Chongming added, "And there is an opportunity to eat and drink for free, why not go?" "Not only him, but also Wang Ning and Wang Huai's posts, I took them all the same." Bai Xian laughed. With Kongming's immobile, mature, and prudent appearance, his worries always seem a little unnecessary. Nowadays, several princes have been sealed in the middle of the dynasty. The external view is that the princes are not very old, and the emperor also wants to keep them by his side for a few more years, instead of sending them to the fiefs. But many people know in their hearts that the emperor has not made up his mind on which one to push up in the end. Although Miss Liu's family is a concubine, her status in the harem is only below the queen, and she has been favored for several years but has no children. In this way, the Liu family, who has been a pillar of the dynasty for generations, is in a very strange and awkward situation. What's more, the Liu family not only has the Marquis of Anding mansion, but also many branches of the Liu family who serve in the court and various places, as well as the Bai family who has been in-laws with the Lu family for generations. The chariot general Bai Shining is the most reassuring name on the land of Deu. It seems that as long as this name is still there, those wolf cubs who are staring outside the customs will not dare to have a half-coveted heart. The Bailiu family is inseparable, and it is a force that no one dares to underestimate in all dynasties. In private, more people are speculating that concubine Lu has no children under her doting, and if it is not frail, it is very likely that it is the inspiration of that one. This is all speculation. Although some people in the court stood in the ranks of the kings because of the relationship between the open and the secret, more people, like the Lu family and the Bai family, maintained a wait-and-see attitude. No one dares to jump to conclusions until the dust settles. Bai Shilai is younger than the two of them. Every time I come over to join in the fun, I can't get into the topic. But come here. Lu Qingqi, the third son of the Lu family, happens to be about the same age as Bai Shilai. I don't think so, Bai Xian laughed at him. You should say, Qingqi has a high mind, and it's not like you are in the eyes of money. You are right. Lu Chongming raised his chin and motioned for the two to wait here. By the way, Chongming, before he went out, Bai Xian asked in passing, have you seen Fang Weiyang recently? I have something to do with him. I just fished him out of the soft red square yesterday and left him there, you can find it yourself. Huanyi building. Bai Xian tutted, the weasel has entered the chicken coop. He squinted his eyes and suddenly laughed wickedly. I said there is a friend like Fang Weiyang who guards the chicken coop, why isn't he a weasel? Lu Chongming understood what he said, glanced sideways, and fluttered his sleeves as he passed by. Just kidding. Bai Xian jumped up vigilantly in time, and heard the sound of the chair legs cracking. When he looked back, he had already gone out. What's the matter? Bai Shilai leaned over to check, what did you say? Why is the second brother angry? Bai Xian laughed in pain, but waved his hand, it's nothing, don't ask children. Joke. After a while, Lu Chongming changed his clothes and greeted the two of them, let's go, you two are here again in time for lunch, and you obviously want to eat here again? It seems that you are not afraid of being here with me. Smells like copper coins. When he stepped over the threshold, something made a clear and low noise, which made Bai Shilai ask, second brother, what is the sound of your body? Lu Chongming turned around and showed him a small jade pendant pinned to his waist. There was also a small jade bead on the corner of the jade pendant. When it touched the jade pendant, it would make a little noise. Bai Xian is no stranger to this thing. He accompanied Lu Chongming to the Nanluo temple to ask for it, but when the host replaced Chongming with this personal amulet, he was not allowed to accompany him and go to the meditation room. Chongming, he rushed his younger brother to the front, walked side by side with Lu Chongming, and asked softly, is it better after that? He was naturally asking about that weird dream. It was enough to repeat it a few years ago, but now there is a follow-up, which is a bit scary. Well, Lu Chongming nodded and answered vaguely, don't worry. He slowly stepped out of the threshold, listening to the occasional crisp sound from his waist, and he didn't tell Bai Xian something. In the dream, he also heard this sound. The Jingxi Academy, which had been entangled for many years, disappeared. He stood on the stone steps in the palace, and the voice came from far and near very slightly. The man with the jade pendant walked unhurriedly, gracefully and rhythmically. Every few steps forward, the jade bead collided with the waist pendant and made a ding sound. He recognized that the jade pendant was the one on his body. He can even feel that even if there is a pair of dry bones under the clothes, it is still intriguing. An unseen building. He looked around and confirmed that he was still in the palace, but he had never been to this place. He only vaguely saw the word GE on the plaque, and saw a person walking out from the corner. It was Eunuch Yu, the who always served the emperor. Only the hem of the clothes, he can guess the identity of this person. This position has fulfilled many people's dreams of reaching the sky in one step. It is not only a stage for charlatans in all corners of the world, but also a place where all the forces in the DPRK and China try their best to install people. How can there be so many prophets in the world? So far, the one who has been proud of this position for the longest time has only stayed for just over a year. The frequency of replacement was too fast. Lu Chongming only saw the hem of the clothes, and did not know who this person was. Yu father-in-law said something to the man, and the two walked together in the direction that Pu had just left. Before leaving, the man seemed to turn sideways and looked at him. Lu Chongming has never been able to see the face of the Sishangwan, but he feels that the narrow and slender waist is very familiar, as if he has touched it countless times. This is the first time such a confused and mindless dream. Remembering what the abbot said when he handed this jade pendant to him, do everything from your heart, don't regret it, he couldn't help touching the jade pendant. Suddenly a very absurd idea occurred. I don't know if that person's jade pendant was given by him, or if he is carrying that person's jade pendant now. In any case, their relationship has a different intimacy than others, even more familiar than him and the Bai brothers, but why he can't remember at all who this person is.